Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly show of What is School For? On this show, I interview leading education professionals, educators, teachers, parents, students, traditional, non-traditional students, entrepreneurs, business leaders to discuss, debate, and disrupt education. And today we are talking about something that is very close and dear to my heart, which is mental health. And I taught in the classroom for 10 plus years, and I can say this for sure. One big change that I noticed among my students within the last 10 years is mental health. The number of students who really struggle with mental health has increased a lot. So join me live is the one and only Matthew Martin Hall. Matthew is a creative and marketing director at the Freedom Writers Foundation. And I had the great honor a few weeks ago to interview the foundation's founder, Aaron. And that was a great interview. You guys should definitely check out the replay. I'm going to put the link in the comment section. And Matthew, he is a two-time school dropout.
Proud of it.
Proud dropout. I'm a professor dropout and also very proud, hashtag. And Matthew himself also battled with mental health. So I really appreciate people like him to come out and share about their own struggles so that we can all learn from each other and remove the social stigma surrounding people who are dealing with mental health issues. And so you are going to walk away from today's interview with a much better understanding of mental health and how bad the situation is, and also some practical tips and recommendations that you can apply at home. I know many of you are parents and entrepreneurs watching this show. So we are going to give you some really hands-on exercises and practical tips that you can apply at home or in the classroom to really help your children to build their mental resilience muscle. So we are live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Periscope, and on YouTube and on Twitch. It's hard to remember. So yeah, let me know in the comment section where you guys are joining us live from, social media wise and geographically speaking. And Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I'm really excited to dive deep into this this field that I am very passionate about and also affected by. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to really kind of to speak on this and share my story with the hope that it impacts people or can help even just in the littlest bit.
Oh, absolutely. You are definitely going to drop so much value. So I want to start today's discussion by talking about your personal educational journey. As I was doing research on this topic, and I discovered, which is now surprising to me, that stress is actually a major contributing factor to many students' mental health issues. And you have a very interesting educational journey, as I mentioned earlier. Dropped out twice. So do you mind sharing your personal educational journey with us? And what triggered you to drop out of school, not only once, but twice?
Yeah, so there are a number of contributing factors, right? There's no just sort of one size fits all answer to this kind of a question. And I just would like to first say that I can only really speak to my story, and that's all I'm going to speak about. If it helps in certain ways and doesn't in others, by all means, that's fine. But just so for me, education was always something that was very much pushed in my family and in my household. You know, I don't come from a lot. I had a father that worked really, really hard. I had a mother that worked really, really hard. And we still kind of didn't have a lot of stuff, right? I was raised with my brothers and sisters in a bit of poverty, and we were relatively poor. So so education was always introduced to me as sort of this way out, right? This way out of those circumstances. And it was something that was really, really adhered to by I'm the youngest of four. by my brothers and sisters. And, they're stellar examples of education, doing amazing things and all of that. And when I up through middle school, everything was okay, right? I was fine with the sort of assembly line lifestyle that education forced me into. It was all this mission to get out, so to speak. And then when I got to high school and started getting a little more rebellious, started getting a little more, I started questioning authority quite a bit, and kind of the nature of authority. Like, why should authority just exist, right? Why should respect just exist because I'm told it does? And I started asking all of those questions and experimenting with those challenges. And I think that got me into a little bit of trouble. And then what really kind of sealed the deal, I think, was reading Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and having all of these ideas I had about education confirmed in a very, very overt, satirical, dystopian way. And that really was kind of the nail in the coffin. I had gone through a lot of high school challenging my teachers to explain why something was important or why something should be relevant to me. And really the only classes I ever had any sort of interest in going to, and eventually only went to, were my English and creative writing classes. And so it was my senior year, and I was also band. I was a band geek, proud of it. And really these creative outlets were what I was getting the most out of high school. Aside from that, it was pretty much a lot of just general apathy. And so when it came to my senior year, I had to take a night class because I didn't pass a history course and all of that. And I was in the middle of all of it, and I had a choice to either go hang out with a friend or and miss this last night class to not graduate, or to go to the night class and just do it and graduate. And I had this kind of epiphany where I don't care. There's nothing here for me. This way out that I was sold is now just it's this exercise in what feels like complete futility. And I went and hung out with my buddy and didn't go back to school. I should also mention that in my senior year, I also had, I think, over 160 single period absences. I would show up to school. I would go to my concert band or my marching band class, and then I would go to my creative writing class, and I would just kind of stay there until my English class. And the only reason I would go to my English class is because we were learning something about poetry, and if I weren't at that class, then the students wouldn't get as much of a education, because my AP English teacher in my senior year put me in charge of teaching romantic and classical poetry. as a sort of joke, one of those, oh, well, if you think you can teach the class, why don't you get up and do it? So I would get up and I would do it, and it just became kind of a mainstay whenever we got to poetry. So that was my experience, and I didn't feel like it was the route for me. And so I dropped out of high school it was either, I can't remember if it was 3 weeks or a couple of months before graduation. And didn't really look back. My mother was very upset with me. So
of course, yeah.
She made me get my, which was funny because my mother was upset with me, but my dad was like, you'll figure it out. And so she made me get my GED, which I did. And with that, I was able to go to my first year of film school in San Francisco at the Academy of Art University. And so I went to the Academy of Art University for that first year, and it was a ridiculous amount of money. It was, and obviously the standards weren't too high because they let me, a high school dropout with a GED, into it. And you know, I wasn't really ready for school at that level. I thank that experience because I was able to get a camera in my hand and I was able to discover something I was legitimately passionate about and something that I could really use and something that would get me out of this cycle of poverty, you know? But I wasn't mature enough to really handle it. And I got involved in a lot of like rather nefarious things in San Francisco. It is the land of distraction. I love that city. I love that city to death. It is beautiful. It is fantastic. But all of those things packed into that little like 7x7 square lends a lot to the sort of less than productive behaviors of somebody who may not be mature enough to be there yet and has access to all of these things. And so that was my second dropout experience. I failed out my first semester, and then was on academic probation and failed out my second semester and just came back home. And that was my experience with education initially.
Wow, I just love this because, you know, on this show, we call each other disruptive learners. I had interviewed quite a few dropouts. So very interesting story. And there are quite a few things I want to unpack a little bit. And you mentioned that you were challenging, you know, the teacher's authority by asking them why we need to learn this, why this matters. You know, as I listened to your story, it was like, wow, that is a great question, right? We need to answer. It's not even challenging authority. This is something learning has to be personal. Unless I figure it out why this matters to me right now, I wouldn't want to learn this, right? Even in my life right now, I'm a lifelong learner, but the things that have nothing to do with my life right now, running a business, social media, or education, like I wouldn't be interested in learning. I love that you mentioned that. And also I think another point that you mentioned as you were talking and sharing your story, and really made me question, you know, oftentimes we use the age as a way to define, you know, you mentioned that you are now ready for school, but age-wise you are ready. But there are other factors that makes us not ready for school. I think that is something we also, as parents and educators, we need to think about, right? We have always been using age, you know, 5 years old, you need to do this, and you are supposed to do this, this, and that. And 7 years old, you are supposed to do this, this, and that. But I feel like children don't really work and function in that very linear fashion. And your example clearly today, you are very successful, you know, professional. And I don't think it's a matter of ability, but like, am I interested in learning this at this time? So I love that. Yeah.
And I think, and to that point too, I think one of the greatest disservice that we pay to students is this idea that at this age you need to learn this. You know, that age is the defining factor for your learning group is baffling to me. It completely negates any sort of individuality or individual learning journey, or anything. It completely strips access from students. And I think that that's a great disservice that we pay to them with this sort of assembly line learning system that we have based on
100%. Just like, you know, seeing the transformation in the students at my own school, classroom without walls, and even seeing my own children. My older son is watching this interview right now, and I'm so convinced that children are not the problem, but the way that we're educating them is very problematic. So Darren, I love this comment from Darren. It's crazy how many students are actually dealing with mental health issues. It is so true. Darren is also an amazing educator based in the UK. And just the last year, I lost friends who lost the children because of mental health issues. And just the last several months, I lost quite a few. And friends, their children committed suicide. Very, very unfortunate. And I think, yeah, like we're going to, like, I have numbers here. And in fact, suicide, at least in the United States, is the third leading cause of death for young people between like 15 to 24 years old. And among college age students, like, committing suicide is the second leading cause of death. I was like, wow, so alarming, all those numbers, right? Yeah. So I want you, maybe you can kind of, before we transition to mental health, and maybe you can summarize for us, Matthew, what are some key lessons that you learned from dropping out of school 2 times and then later rediscovered your passion for learning?
Yeah, I think that the two big things is that the things that I always gravitated towards and the things that I always respected were being treated as an individual and treated with respect, regardless of sort of this fictitious authority structure I was supposed to abide by. And so the teachers that really spoke to me and the ones that I always tried to impress and the ones that I always tried to do work for were the ones that treated me like a human being and not a butt in a seat, who listened to me and who were willing to kind of think their way around my corners and sort of see the things I was experiencing and dealing with, whether I was saying outwardly expressing it. I don't even think I had the words to express a lot of the things I was dealing with in my own, with my own mental health issues. And I think that's why I gravitated to a lot of those creative areas, because that's where the teachers really did listen. In their own specific ways. Nobody came up to me and said, Matt, I think you're dealing with something, but they would make sure to call on me if I wanted to share a piece of poetry or a piece of writing. And regardless of how terrible or regardless of how terrible it was or whether or not it was appropriate for school, they always gave me that space to speak. And I think that really making students feel valued and heard and chosen and appreciated does a lot to navigate the issues that kept me from seeing school as an access point to anything but just like antiquated ideas and structures.
I love this. It's so true. I love this comment from Lisa. Thank you for joining us live. It's all about that student-teacher relationship. It is so true, right? People don't remember what you say, but they remember how you make them feel. It is emotional. And I read so many studies suggesting and showing that when students have a better emotional connection with the teacher, they are more interested in the subject matter. They actually do better in the classes, that they have a stronger personal connection with the teacher. And even alumni, like last year, I read this study, a group of researchers, they interviewed those people who donated to, Ivy League schools like Stanford, Yale, and they asked them, why are you guys donating? So the most compelling answer is that because one person has made an impact in the student's life, not because of the overall ranking of the school, but that personal connection. So I love that. It's such a great point.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that too is why I feel so at home with the Freedom Writers Foundation, where I work now, is because that was the pedagogy and the methodology of Erin. And to this day, she still makes everyone, feel heard and connected. And, it's a work environment that I haven't experienced before. And I think that it's extremely, it's not just good for me, it's extremely healthy for me as well. So
yeah, totally. I think we all have stories about toxic work environment. Yeah, totally. I had a few. Yeah. So share with us. You mentioned earlier, you also battled with mental health. So is there a specific age that you started to experience depression, or what type of mental health issues that you are struggling with? If you don't mind sharing.
No, not at all. Absolutely. I love being able to talk about this. There were some time in the recent past where I probably wouldn't have been able to. But I think it's very important for people who experience what I'm experiencing, or what they may be experiencing, to kind of to speak about it and sort of destigmatize the notions that surround mental health issues and disorders. So my journey started when I was very young, but I didn't realize it started when I was that young with mental health. I was first diagnosed with severe depressive disorder, or whatever they called it then, because it's changed. I don't know. I haven't consulted the DSM lately, but severe depressive disorder when I was 14. Very luckily, I grew up in a household that was that did not stigmatize the mental health issues or anything like that. My mother, I love her to death. She has dealt with her own issues and has found a lot of success with treatment plans and what have you. So we were always very much open to receiving counseling and whatever methods work. And so when I was 14, I was diagnosed with severe depressive disorder, and I started speaking to a psychologist, and I started taking Prozac, taking medication. Medication at that level and at that time completely stunted my creativity. It was not good for me. I didn't like it and completely rejected my treatment from that point on. So that was my first touch on it. And it wasn't until I didn't get really serious about it again until I was actually working for a veterans group. It was my first job out of college, the Veterans Association of Real Estate Professionals, where I used to make videos and kind of and distribute these videos to get big banks to give us properties so that we could give them to veterans, right? And I was sitting in a car on a freeway with Oscar. He was one of our board members for one of the chapters, and we were just talking. Oscar was a Marine. He was a combat Marine. He lost some friends in the war, and had deals with a lot. And we were talking, and he just asked me this simple question. Like he asked me, how are you doing? And I said, I haven't been sleeping really well. I have all these really bad nightmares. It's nothing new, but, and just started going through this sort of my relationship with sleep, and how it worked with my attitude. And he looked at me, he was like, I go through the same sort of thing. I have PTSD. Maybe you should ask somebody about that. And I had never thought, I'm dealing on the daily with Marines and soldiers and sailors who have lost friends, who have been blown up, who have, gone through all of these things. And to think that I have PTSD. I've never been to war. I've never done any of these things. I had a hard childhood and grew up and figured things out late. Like, that I didn't have any of those things. And but on his suggestion, and I thank him every day, because I really do think that that simple conversation saved my life in a real way. I went and I talked to a psychologist, and it was a very surreal time in my life, because in talking to that psychologist and in really kind of digging into some issues, I had this, I can only speak to my experience, but the idea that you have blocked out certain events in your life And when those are revealed to you, it's really surreal when you remember things that happened to you and the roots of this trauma, and start linking it to these sort of these emotional expressions. And through these counseling sessions, I was able to link a lot of my depression and the severity of my depression to a lot of emotional, physical, and sexual trauma I experienced as a child, from as early as me being the first memories of which started when I was 6 years old, really carrying through when I was 14, when I started when I first had that diagnosis, and connecting those events to my thoughts of suicide, my thoughts of hopelessness, my complete and utter apathy, was such an important and revelatory experience for me, and really started the second phase of my treatment and my understanding of my own mental health and well-being, and really seeking to be healthy in my brain and in my body, and understanding the connection to all of these things. And so, again, I thank Oscar to this day, because I really do think that conversation and starting that journey late in my life, it was 6 years ago that I started that. I was 25 when I really started digging in again. And I am the happiest. I am the most successful. I am the most proud, and I am the most loving of myself that I have ever been, because of that conversation, and because of the journey I've taken thus far. I had a lot of really unhealthy relationships, and trying to self-medicate, unhealthy relationships with drugs, with alcohol, with people, and with myself more than anything, that I was able to really navigate. And now I am just, I feel like the success story I deserve to be.
Well, first of all, thanks for sharing and being so vulnerable, so open, and what a journey, very very profound. I love, and I definitely want to talk about like medication versus the alternative method. I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned like medications are actually affecting your creativity. That is so interesting. How could you tell? Like I asked this question because I personally, even now, I have friends and parents and whose children are actually dealing with and struggling with mental health issues, and the first or the only way they think of to cure the problem is medication. And it's really interesting for me to hear that you are reflecting on this, how medication is actually affecting creativity. Was that like you noticed right away? Or do you mind sharing with that? It's like, are there certain signs that you caught, or?
So it was interesting, and I don't think that it's something that, had I not been as creative as I was, I would have caught, because I really gauged a lot of my access to those dark spaces that I dwelled in quite a bit when I was younger. I really gauged my access to those spaces based on how much how much I was writing, how much I was producing creatively. And when I started taking Prozac, and let me just say this, I currently do take medication, but medication, my psychiatrist put it this way, is a blunt instrument. It is not surgical. It's not going into one part of your brain and making it activate and do these things and other things. It affects multiple parts, and it is something that requires some experimentation. It's something that does require a little bit of patience and understanding. I didn't have the patience and the understanding when I was an angry, self-sabotaging 14-year-old kid. But now I do. I actually take Lexapro now, which is a milder form of Prozac, and it works beautifully with me in tandem with exercise, in tandem with talk therapy, in tandem with consistent checks and meditation and all of these things that I also do, right? So I think to get back to your question, I apologize. I just want to make that caveat. When I was 14 and I was taking the Prozac, it was way too much of a dose for me. And it numbed me. I wasn't feeling terrible. I wasn't feeling good. I wasn't feeling anything. And, it wasn't giving me access to those dark places. It was just kind of placing them in a weird fog, if that makes sense, if that metaphor makes any sense. And so I wasn't writing anything. I wasn't creating anything. I was just kind of going through the motions. And that was after about 6 months of taking Prozac. And after because it does take time for those effects to be, for it to take effect, right? And so I threw out the bottle. I said, forget this. This is not working for me. I need to be creating. That's healthier for me. That's better for me. I don't know if it was healthier, but it was better for me to create and access those spaces and kind of deal with them than it was to just completely numb it in a fog and pretend like none of this exists, but now, today, with the very mild sort of dosage of that same kind of Prozac medication, I'm not sure exactly what it is in Prozac, but anyway, I am, ask anybody, I'm creative as ever. I'm making music all weekend, coming weekend. I'm not numbed or stifled, but I'm also using a bunch of other, methods, the notion that medication will solve everything is the greatest detriment to the understanding of medication. Again, think of medication as a blunt instrument, right? It is just one piece. You're not going to put together a house with just a hammer, right?
Yeah.
You need structural integrity. You need the wood to hammer things in. You need to build this structure with a number of things. And one of those pieces to any successful journey with mental health and to mental health and to be mentally healthy is to understand that it takes more than just that. It takes more than just this one thing. There is no silver bullet, and also I think another part of it too is that I've largely accepted that for the rest of my life, I will be depressed. I have depression. This is something that I cannot cure, but it is something that I can mitigate with tools and with the tools that I have normalized in my life. And, accepting that as the reality and being okay with that being the reality. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, if I wasn't as depressed as a kid, I would not be on this journey that I am now. If I didn't go through those struggles and everything, if I didn't have to dig myself out of some really, really, really dark places, I wouldn't be the resilient human that is for you today, happy as a clam, And so, it has made me as much as it has, as much as it has hurt me. But, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. And I've made my peace with that. And I've reconciled that as my reality. And I'm happier because of it. I don't know if that makes much sense, but it does to me.
Oh, definitely. And even when I think about the things in my life, like the things that happened, I was like, wow, devastated by, and they made me who I am today. And they actually made me a better person because of those things. And I when you're talking about medication, I think about the weight loss industry, right? Like it's just like you're taking some pills here and there. Maybe they will help you lose some weight, but it is definitely not a long-term solution. And just taking pills will not help you lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds on consistent basis. So I love how you're talking about, right? Meditation is not going to solve all the problem, but there are actually other ways that you can do on top of in tandem, as you mentioned. So this is actually a similar question that I have. And so Dan asked you in talking about, mental health, stress seems to affect all of us, especially right now with the COVID and the economy, so many people on social media, this and that. And so what are some preventive therapy or psychological help that you recommend? I think you mentioned a few. So do you mind kind of give us a summary of some preventive method or therapies that you have used that really helped you?
Yeah. I have found a lot of solace and a lot of resilience in this time in my healthy relationships to others, in my open relationships to others, in sticking to my own mental health plan, that being consistently taking my medication, consistently meeting with my therapist, consistently exercising, practicing a responsible relationship with alcohol, and really just checking in with myself. I think there is a propensity to get lost in a lot of the rabbit holes that things like social media and these other prevalent forms of like accessing society that we have to resort to now, since we can't like be around one another as much as we were before. I think a lot of checking in with yourself and really asking yourself, and I do this, I don't know, maybe this is just me. Like, do I love myself today? Do I love myself today? And if I say yes, then cool. Like, let's move forward. What's on the docket, And if I don't, if I'm not feeling that for myself today, how can I get there, right? And that's really a lot of like my morning meditation, while I'm drinking my coffee or something like that, is I check in with myself. I check in with myself and I say, all right, where are we at, Matt? What are we doing? And I think that that's probably, maintaining healthy relationships with others, but most of all, maintaining a healthy relationship with yourself and having that internal dialogue is game changing. And I think that's the best kind of preventative medicine, is really just to, if we're trying to hide from ourselves what's wrong, with different like self medications. Like I used to drink way too much, and that was just I was blocking out all of my issues with consistent blackouts. Like you can't think if you're blacked out drunk. So checking in with yourself and checking in with your healthy relationships is, I think, the greatest key. And working towards creating those relationships if you don't have them, and consciously doing so.
Yeah, I also love how you faced your own fear, right? Actually dig deeper into the history to look at, wow, what's the root of the problem. I feel like if every single person go through this, we will discover a lot more about our own fears and the way that we're behaving, that we're talking today. I'm sure if we do a therapy, and we can trace back to history to see, oh wow, what is the root cause for me saying things and behaving and showing up the way that I do today. Very, very interesting. I love how you said that, do I love myself? Actually, one of my coaches actually told me, one thing you can do is every day in the mirror. She said that you can be naked in front, just yourself in the bathroom, in front of the mirror, and say, I love you. Like you love myself, mention your own name. And she said that many people actually have a hard time by saying that, like truly, like out of compassion, genuinely, and we love who we are. So that is a very powerful exercise for me to do. Yeah.
Well, and to that as well, I also want to say that I feel like I wanted to add this bit. I feel like people wait until they experience some sort of crisis, some mental health crisis or event to then seek help.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is it's hard, but don't wait until that happens. Like, it's okay to go and talk to people about how you're feeling. It's okay to see a therapist and not have a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's okay to discover things about yourself or discover things about your trauma before they manifest in a way that is detrimental to you physically, emotionally, socially, or something. Like, don't wait. You don't have to wait. If you feel like there's something brewing, if you just kind of feel off, if you have access to it, talk to a therapist, or just talk to a friend, talk to a family member, somebody you love and somebody you trust. Don't wait until it becomes an issue.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting that you mentioned this. Reminds me, like I grew up in China. I came to the US when I was 21 or 22 to study. I went to Syracuse. So I grew up in a very big city in China, in Beijing, the capital city. And when I went to Syracuse, for those of you who are in different countries join us live, Syracuse is a very small, like it's definitely not a big city. And I was very, very depressed. And what I noticed, I don't know if my observation is true, what I noticed about American culture is that people don't actually openly talk about the problem, which is very different from in China. In China, the only thing we talk about is problem. This problem, that problem, my problem, your problem. Let's talk about our problem. It's a very different, like culture, very different environment. So when I came here, and I still remember the first time when someone asked me, "How are you?" I was like, "I'm awful. My life was really bad." Then I realized, wow, it was not really a question. It was really interesting. So, like, why do you think there's so much like social stigma surrounding this topic? And also, Matthew, what give you the courage to openly share about this, coming to different podcasts, sharing your story, being so vulnerable. So what give you that courage to talk about this? And also we can talk about the social stigma.
Yeah. So I think America is such an interesting paradox. I feel like we really are. And it's a fun thing to explore when it doesn't become just, again, a rabbit hole. And there's so much to, there's so much standing diametrically opposed in American culture. I feel we have this idea of exceptional individualism, right? This notion of exceptional individualism, but we also have these. There's also things like FOMO. There's things like we attach so much to our image and what we're saying about ourselves that, like, I don't know if this is making much sense, but to address what you're saying, I think that social media is sort of like this perversion of something that's always existed, a paradox that's always existed in American culture, right? Where we only show these best sorts of versions of ourselves. We only show us in the best situations, and we don't talk about anything that is anything that's actually going wrong or anything like that, because we don't want people to perceive us as not these amazing, exceptional, amazing individuals. But like, I don't understand how being upset or being pissed off about something or being pissed off at yourself or having dealt with some really crappy stuff, it does not make you also exceptional, because with that, there's the overcoming. And I think we're just so fascinated with these images of worth that we're not actually really inclined to understand what worth actually is, or what how worth can be meaningful. And so I think that also plays to the stigmatization of mental health, is this idea that if I don't present myself as this perfect human being that is completely flawless in all of these ways, then I'm not going to get the likes and or whatever it is, or I'm not going to be able to quantify my worth at a level that is socially acceptable today, right? So
Yeah.
if I don't get these likes, if I don't get these shares, if I don't get these, if I don't get people posting all of these emojis because I'm on the beach and I'm happy despite all of this crazy crap going on, then then I'm not going to be able to feel worthy, and that's so shallow. That's so empty. That's so empty. And it's ultimately a lie. I love movements that are about reality, and reality is that things are messy, things are hard, things are dirty and ugly, but there's some sort of beauty in just struggling through that. There's some sort of beauty in coming out on the other side and saying that's not me anymore. And I think that if we were to shift the narrative, and if we were to honor sort of the ideas of perseverance and resilience versus just the sort of surface level, hashtag no filter or whatever the common thing is today, that we would be in a lot better place. And I think we can move to do that. I really think that we can. In regards to personally me overcoming that fear, I think that a lot of my journey to being mentally healthy has to do with confronting fear, has to do with confronting a lot of things that scared me. When I think about my childhood, and when I think about it up until really, I sat down with that counselor and was diagnosed with PTSD. I was scared of everything. I didn't have this notion of safety that I thought that everybody else around me did. I always felt threatened. I lived in a constant state of fight or flight, and I always felt like running away from whatever it was, right? I always lived with all of this fear. And it wasn't until I sat down and felt comfortable with confronting those fears that I was really able to actually start healing. And it's become a little bit of a main state for me. I used to hate being up in front of people and talking. This used to be paralyzing to me, but when I was in college, when I was dealing with that stuff, I took a spot every Friday at a local shop and played music for people for hours on end, just to confront that. I'm definitely afraid of heights, so I started rock climbing so I could get on top of giant things, look down, be scared, and just go through it. I think that in the idea of prevention is that we don't want to experience these things, and I think that that's the problem. I think it's an inevitability that I'm going to be scared of things. It's an inevitability that I'm going to be frightened of things. It's an inevitability that days are going to come, and for no reason I can identify, I am going to feel like trash. I'm going to feel completely apathetic. I'm going to hate myself. I'm going to do all of these things that scare me. It is a foregone conclusion that that's going to happen. I can't prevent that from happening. What I can prevent is letting that control my life. I can take control of that by knowing I'm going to go through that and going through it with a smile on my face and knowing that I am going to come out on the other side. I think so much of what we do is fear of experiencing these things. No, you're going to experience these things. Welcome to the real world. You're going to experience some hard things, but that's the beauty of it. Get through it. Get through it.
Totally. Oh, I love everything you mentioned. Wow, and how you actually face your own fear reminds me of what Seth Godin told me: dance with your fear, and I love it. Really powerful. To me, you are such a perfect case, of dancing with your own fear. And so we got some really great comments here. I saw this Phil, talk about FOMO. Like, actually, I told him there's JOMO, joy of missing out. And
I like that. I like that.
That is really powerful. And this is something that, because we deal with social media a lot. So one thing that we incorporate at my own school is I cultivate that self-love. I see a comment from from Lance joining us live from Australia. Loving your neighbors, as yourself. And so just like, everything start with loving the self. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And here we have more with Jomo. Yes, joy of missing out. I think that is something that we all struggle with. Yeah. And we don't have much time left. And I want to definitely talk about education a little bit, because this part is something I'm really passionate about. So I mentioned the numbers a little bit earlier. And so today's young children, I'm talking about middle school, high school, college age ish. And today's young students are ever more depressed than before. So the percentage of young people who are committing suicide has been increasing every single year. So as I mentioned earlier, suicide is the third leading cause of death for young people between 15 to 24. It's the second leading cause of death for college age students. And those numbers are in the United States. So why do you think that's the case? Do you think like education or exam, the traditional educational system play a role in today's our children's mental health? Is there any correlation? What's your take on this between kind of why the number keeps increasing like dramatically?
I think there are so many things that contribute to these numbers, especially today. I mean, it's just I'm sorry, I have to take a pause, because the idea that when I was contemplating harming myself, I could have been one of those numbers, and that's and I'm not, and I'm trying to figure out why, what is the what was the difference, and I think our education system does hold a lot of students, it holds a lot of people to unrealistic standards that aren't tailored to everybody's experience. And I think there's this mythology that exists that we can't tailor education to individual experiences. And I that's just flat out false. The notion that and we've seen it so many places in so many ways. The notion that a teacher in a classroom of 20 to 30 students can't have an individual relationship with each one of them and understand their learning goals. It's difficult. Yeah, the more that number goes up, and we don't prioritize that. But it is possible. I know educators who have done it, and I know educators who are currently doing it, and they are the difference in their children's life. And I think that we hyper prioritize teaching to standards and tests versus teaching to lived experiences and trying to better those lived experiences for students. I do think, there are elements that we're afraid to confront in the education system, things that are taboo, and that I don't necessarily think every educator is interested in confronting in a productive way. I grew up in a predominantly Black and Latino community, and I feel like still being a white passing cisgender male is a lot of the reason, and a lot of the privilege attached to that is what was able to get me out of those situations. I don't think that we do enough to confront racial divides and now gender divides and gaps in education that exist at the root of just identifying, accepting the way people identify themselves, and accepting the stigmas and doing what we can to defeat the stigmas that exist attached to those people, their identities, and to their experience because of their race, gender, and sexual orientation. I know that those numbers increase when we add those caveats, when we add those intensifiers. And I think that we don't do enough to deal with generational trauma for people of color. And I think that we do a lot to try and ignore it because the standards don't do anything to include these experiences. The experiences that we learn about in school are experiences of people that look like me. Yeah. I see myself when I look at the education system. I can relate to it because I'm looking at the textbooks and I see people like me. Right? We don't have that kind of access to people of color. For people of color, we don't have that kind of access for the LGBTQ plus community.
100%.
We don't have that. And the stories that we do have related to those are stories of trauma that we refuse to accept.
Sorry about that, cat.
No, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
Conversation is too interesting.
Yeah, I remember in high school, one of the hardest things for me to do when learning about Western expansion was understanding why we didn't refer to that as one of the greatest genocides in modern history. Tens of millions of natives of this land were slaughtered during that period. Men, women, and children, and we don't, based on their race, and we don't call that a genocide. We don't call the African slavery a genocide. We don't call the Chinese Exclusion Act and the building of our railroads a genocide. We don't mention that people in Mexico and people south of the border were scalped, were stolen, had their land stolen, and were slaughtered just as much during Western expansion. And we don't call that a genocide. This paradox of America being built on the blood and suffering of people that don't look like me, is, I think, contributes to a generational trauma that only grows and only manifests in the ways we're seeing it today with the Black Lives Matter movement and with the reason why they're uprising, with Breonna Taylor, with George Floyd, with all of these people who are victims of generational trauma that we refuse to really see. I was able to be heard because I saw my stories.
Yeah.
I struggle with the ability for students of color and of poverty and of these different situations, all of these different LGBTQ students. I struggle with us with saying that we see them and that we hear them.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the suicide rates and things attributed to education and every system that exists in America and around the world has to do with us seeing those stories and understanding that we are collectively experiencing this, but it's different for people who don't feel heard.
Totally. And I really appreciate the fact that we are openly I'm just reading people's comments. We got lots of great comments. We're actually having this conversation. I think, it really demands the leadership, right? I think as teachers in the classroom or leaders, and we have to be vulnerable, to open up, to share, to encourage conversations like this, to create that, safe space where people feel like I can talk about this without worrying about any repercussions, things like that. And yeah. So I'm just watching the clock, and I do have another podcast I have to go to, and so I want to wrap this up. What a great conversation! We are literally having people from all over the globe join us live, so really nice. So any parting piece of advice regarding like mental health, like most people here are parents, educators, and entrepreneurs, that you can share with us, Matthew, and also share with us where can people learn more about you, and then also on the screen. Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn, Matthew Martin Hall. I'm on Facebook. Look me up. I am look up the stuff I do with the Freedom Writers Foundation as the creative and marketing director. And I very proudly just became a board member of the Youth Mentoring Action Network. So look up what they're doing, and really listen to each other. Listen to yourselves, love one another. Start with you, and have these hard but courageous conversations, because that's going to be the difference, and that's what's going to bring down all of this generational trauma and that we deal with, that we see the residual of. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, and
thank you.
Yeah, for a great conversation, so close and dear to my heart. It's something I really care a lot about. So thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live on Friday, and for some of you on Saturday. Really appreciate your time, and what a great discussion. So next Friday, we're actually taking a family vacation, so I don't have the show. So I will be back in 2 weeks. Don't miss me too much. So thank you so much, everyone. Again, have a great weekend, and see you in 2 weeks. And thank you so much, Matthew. Yeah.
Enjoy your vacation. You deserve it.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.